Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Jamie Gullen. I'm a supervising attorney in the employment unit at Community Legal Services, and we're delighted to welcome you today to our presentation on the Clean Slate Screening Project. For those who weren't able to join us last week, welcome. Just to give you a little background about this series, we're putting on this session today as part of a 5-part series. That's a virtual conference on bringing record clearing to scale, being brought to you by Community Legal Services of Philadelphia through our National Record Clearing Project with support from the WK Kellogg Foundation. We would have been in Atlanta today, actually, for the NLADA ABA Equal Justice pre-conference, presenting this as a whole day session. But obviously circumstances are such that we weren't able to do that, but we're really happy to be able to still engage in these conversations and actually bring it to more people who are able to participate than would have been able to attend the conference. So thanks for joining us. And just in case you're not aware, we have 3 more sessions in the series for each of the next 3 Wednesdays. The upcoming topics are on barriers to record clearing, using technology to scale up record clearing, and advancing record clearing policies. So you'll continue to see updates and reminders about signing up for those, and we hope you'll join us for those sessions as well. But for today, we're really excited to be talking about our Clean Slate Screening Project. And we think this session will be really helpful to practitioners who practice record clearing work, to those who are in states that have clean slate or other types of automated laws or are hoping to have those types of laws in the future, as well as practitioners in other areas. If there are folks on the line today who don't practice record clearing, we think there's still a lot that can be taken away from these efforts with the Clean Slate Screening Project in terms of how to build infrastructure for a really successful large-scale pro bono project. Joining me today on the webinar will be Jessa Boehner, who's our special project coordinator for the Clean Slate Screening Project at Community Legal Services. And we also have Kenneth Winterbottom, who's an associate at Dechert, which is a global law firm headquartered here in Philadelphia. And Ken is also the co-chair of the Clean Slate Project at Dechert. So we're really delighted to have them with us. So just to give you an overview of where we're going to take you today during this webinar, I'm going to start by just giving a broad overview of what Clean Slate is and how it led us here in Pennsylvania to launching the Clean Slate Screening Project. And I'll go through sort of the broad perspective of what the components of the Clean Slate Screening Project are and how they've evolved over time. Then I'll be turning it over to Jessa, who will talk us through the nuts and bolts of how we've tackled this work. And then finally, we'll be turning it over to Ken, who's going to take us inside a big law firm perspective and give us tips on how to make a really successful partnership with a law firm to help enhance our capacity, especially for those who are legal aid practitioners, to be able to deliver really large scale and quality legal advice and representation. So we're going to leave a lot of time at the end for Q&A. We have until 3:30. We don't know if we'll need that full time, but we want to leave a lot of time for your questions. So please, throughout the presentation, put your questions into the chat pod, and our colleague Katie Swoboda-Kindle will be collecting those, and Katie will jump in after Ken's presentation concludes to start asking questions to the panelists. So please do, as questions come to you, put them in your chat box. All right, so let's dive in. Clean Slate 101. So Clean Slate is a law, in case you're not familiar, that uses automated and retroactive sealing or expunging of criminal records using computer queries that are run either by a court repository or a law enforcement repository to clear huge amounts of criminal records in bulk. And here in Pennsylvania, which was the first state to pass a Clean Slate law, all non-conviction records, as well as summary convictions and some misdemeanor convictions, can be sealed through automation. PA was the first, but certainly not the last state to pass a Clean Slate law. Utah followed closely behind, and there are many more states with Clean Slate laws currently in their pipelines. In terms of how Clean Slate is rolling out here in Pennsylvania, by the end of June of this year, over 30 million cases will be sealed through automation, which represents half of our entire court's database. So that's just a huge, huge volume of work that our courts have performed and our law enforcement agencies have performed over the past year since the automated feature of Clean Slate went into effect. But one huge aspect of laws like Clean Slate and all record clearing laws really is that it's really difficult to get the word out to people. And for Clean Slate, people do not get individualized notice that their record has been automatically sealed. And there are a few reasons for that. A lot of the cases that are getting sealed are very old, so the addresses that the courts have on file are not necessarily good addresses for people. There's a huge cost that would be involved in sending individual notices. A lot of kind of logistical hurdles to trying to do an individual notice piece that has made that something that hasn't really been a component of the Clean Slate law, at least here in Pennsylvania. So that kind of led us to think about, how do we get the word out about Clean Slate, because that's going to be really critical to the success of the law. So as we started to realize how critical it was to make sure that people know about this, there are a few reasons why that's so important. First, this is probably the most obvious one, is that we want people to know that their record's been sealed, so that if they're going out for jobs or they're applying to school or they're trying to get housing, they can do that without having to worry about their records popping up. So that's kind of the most foundational reason that it's really important to notify people that their record's been sealed. But there are a couple of more practical reasons too. Here in Pennsylvania, and probably in all states, the court records are not always totally complete. There's a lot of missing data in the court records. Here in Pennsylvania, we're missing a lot of grade-related data that makes it difficult to identify certain cases as being eligible. So there are a lot of people who are eligible for automated relief, but because the grade is missing from their record, it's not getting picked up in the queries being run. And so if people know that, there are steps they can take to either get the data entered into their case so it can be automatically sealed, or they can file a petition to seal it. So that's one really important piece of being able to interface with people about their eligibility. Another major area in Pennsylvania, and probably in other states, is if people owe court fines and costs. Under our current Clean Slate law, those do need to be paid before people can benefit. We're trying to change that, but for now, that is the requirement. And often we find people don't know that they owe money to the court. They were advised when they finished their probation that they were all done, they had satisfied all of their debts, but unfortunately the court still has records that they owe money. And so being able to outreach to people about what money they owe, which sometimes can be as little as $10 on a case. Sometimes it's much, much more than that, of course. But being able to advise people that they owe that money and that there are steps they need to take to redress that in order for their record to be sealed is also really important. And then finally, under Pennsylvania's law, and probably in many other states, there's also a petition-based sealing process. So people with more serious misdemeanors, for example, can't benefit from the automated process, but they can file a petition to seal their record. So another part of kind of reaching out to people is letting them know what the eligibility is for petition-based sealing and where they can go for help to file. So taking all of that into account and thinking through how we were going to get the word out about these things, the idea for the Clean Slate Screening Project was born. And I tried to intersperse the presentation with some photos just to liven it up and embarrass our team. But here you can see a photo of our governor, Governor Tom Wolf, with our litigation director, Sharon Dechert, who were together on the day, January 2nd, of 2019, where they announced the Clean Slate Screening Project at a press conference. And the original idea behind the Clean Slate Screening Project was we were going to start a pro bono project where volunteer lawyers could advise people about how Clean Slate would be able to help them and what steps they needed to take. So a pretty straightforward concept. But on January 2nd, the governor announces that people can sign up via a basic Google form at the website mycleanslatepA.com and get individualized advice about how Clean Slate will help them. And by January 3rd, we had over 3,000 people signed up through that Google form. And just a few weeks later, that number was up over 8,000 people. So we never anticipated at the outset of this project that, we knew there was a huge need for this work, of course, but we never anticipated we would be so immediately inundated with such a high volume of requests for individualized advice. And so it really led us to have to rethink in many ways how we were planning to approach the project and build a really multifaceted system for tackling this huge volume. And that system has very much evolved over time. So in the very early days of the Clean Slate Screening Project, our concept was that we would partner with the Pennsylvania and Philadelphia Bar Associations. We would host large-scale CLE trainings for volunteer lawyers, and we'd make those trainings free if folks agreed to take a certain number of Clean Slate Screening Project cases to give advice to people about their eligibility under the law. So through those initial sets of trainings, we trained over 500 lawyers around the state who each took on a handful of individuals who they do the screenings for and deliver advice to. And the Pennsylvania Bar Association was very much coordinating that process. But as we kind of went through that process and started working on these cases, we just saw that we were going to need a much higher level of both external partnership and internal capacity to be able to really make a dent in the over 8,000 cases for people who had signed up for help. So we started building additional partnerships, and one of our first and most successful ones was with Ken over at Dechert, and we'll hear a lot more about that later in the presentation. And we also built up our internal capacity. So we hired a few new staff members, including Jessa, who's helped us really revolutionize how we were approaching this project and coordinate and deliver advice. We also have several paralegals in our office who do an amazing job of doing some of these screenings and advice cases themselves under attorney supervision. So we have taken on a fair chunk of these cases in-house at CLS as well. And really the only way we've been able to move through our list as successfully as we have is because we've figured out along the way how to automate different components of the project to be able to provide information and advice. And a lot of that has been built into our website, mycleanslatepa.com. And if you tune into the technology panel, that'll be 2 weeks from today, you'll hear a lot more about how that website has been used so far and what our vision is for it going forward in terms of people being able to get the information and advice they need through automated analysis and explainers through the website portal in most cases. But we envision, and we'll talk more about this at the end, that there will always be a component of needing more individualized and tailored advice from lawyers or volunteers as well. So that's sort of just the broad overview of how we've kind of built out the project over time. And Jessa's going to take us through those components in a lot more detail in a little while. And in addition to the project as it relates to providing the individualized information and advice to the original 8,000 people on our list, we've also been able to use the folks who have signed up from our list to be able to kind of build a community and to support advocacy efforts around criminal record reforms. And so in addition to the original 8,000 plus people who signed up for individual advice, through our website, more people have signed up to join our email list. So now we have over 10,000 people signed up on our email list. And so one thing we do is we send out email blasts every 2 weeks or so about relevant topics related to, trying to find a job with a record or updates on Clean Slate reforms, like trying to eliminate the fines and cost requirement, things of that nature, so that people are, kept in the loop about advancements and changes in the law, and also have content relevant to them about, how to apply for jobs and housing and things like that with a record. And another huge component of our CSSP community has become that it's really a place where people can tell their stories and get engaged in advocacy efforts to remove some of the barriers caused by having a record. So when we're working on other types of campaigns, and we've listed a few examples here, what we'll do is we'll create a short Google survey and send it out to the list along with some information and context about the campaign we're working on, and ask if folks have experience with that issue and if they're interested in sharing their story with us. And so a few examples of times when we've done this in the past year have included working around our occupational licensing reform bill in Pennsylvania to really drastically improve the way criminal records are considered in the licensing process. We've also started a push to expand our Clean Slate law to felony sealing, as well as remove the fines and cost barriers. And most recently, we've been involved in communicating with folks about how having a criminal record has impeded their ability to access COVID-19 relief under the small business programs that have received some media attention. And so on all of those topics, we've been able to gather people's individual stories, follow up and have conversations with people about their experiences. And for those who are interested, helping them find ways to tell their story to a broader audience, whether it's through the media, through contacting legislators, through coming to press conferences or rallies. It's been a really amazing way to connect with people who are really motivated to try to change some of these unjust systems. And it's been, really inspiring to be able to kind of build that kind of network all over the state as well, because being a Philadelphia-based organization, we often don't have contact with people in other parts of the state who are experiencing these issues. So it's really been amazing to try to kind of build up this community around the state. So we're really excited to be able to see where that part of this project is going to take us going forward. So with that kind of broad overview in mind, I'm now going to turn it over to Jessa, who's going to walk you through sort of the nuts and bolts of how the project works. And Jessa is going to be referencing a lot of materials that we've created over time. And at the end of the webinar, we will be following up with everyone on the line to provide some of those tools and resources to you directly. So I will now turn it over to Jessa.
Great, thank you, Jamie. PowerPoint up here. All right, so just to bring us to the present, where we are currently with our Clean Slate Screening Project, we had a total of 8,581 Pennsylvanians who signed up to have their records screened for eligibility for record sealing under Clean Slate. To date, we've completed 7,361 of those cases, so about 86%. And we still have remaining to screen about 1,220 cases, or about 14%. So how did we get here? So as the project became a lot bigger than we expected, we took some calculated steps to kind of refine the process and improve. Sorry, I'm just seeing that. Okay, so how did we get here? So as the project became a lot bigger than we expected, we took some calculated steps to kind of refine the process and to improve our volunteer program. So to start, we developed systems and an automatic response component to help us analyze the records and give advice as efficiently as possible. Then we moved towards creating training and supporting materials, front-loading a lot of work to make sure that we were giving volunteers the tools that they needed to complete the screenings independently. Then we completed a lot of outreach to expand our program by recruiting a number of capable volunteers. And then lastly, we created our volunteer portal, which collects everything that we need in one place and helps us to improve our management of the CSSP project. Okay, so before we jump ahead too far, I just want to clarify some terms and just talk a little bit about the technology that we use in our project. So when I'm referring to an individual, I'm referring to a person who has signed up via a Google form to have their entire record screened for eligibility for sealing under Clean Slate. So that refers to the 8,581 individuals that we referenced. An analyzer is an attorney, or in some cases, a law student or a paralegal who's working with attorney supervision, who's going to be analyzing that individual's records on a Google sheet and giving them advice about their eligibility. And so the technology that we use, we rely a lot on Google. So we used a Google form to initially, as a sign-up sheet, to collect the individual's personal information that we need to look up their record, as well as their contact information, so we can get in touch with them. We use a Google Sheet, which is basically like an Excel spreadsheet that you can access via a hyperlink, and that's what we use to complete our analyses. And then we use Gmail to auto-generate individualized emails to the individuals, giving them the advice that they need. Okay, so at first we wanted to develop systems so we could maximize our efficiency of the project. So our overarching goal is to screen an applicant's criminal record to determine their eligibility for record sealing under Clean Slate and advise them of their next steps. So at first, what would happen is that analyzers would kind of pull up a case that they wanted to screen. They would look through the record and make their determination, and then they would write a short narrative about the eligibility. And then they would send an individual email or make an individual phone call to that person. So for example, here we have 3 different individuals that are going to ultimately need the same advice. We've determined that they're eligible for automatic sealing, but the data that we're collecting on those is like very different. So in one case, we're writing accept. In another, we're saying eligible for sealing or partial expungement. In another, fully eligible now. So what we wanted to do instead to kind of streamline this process is to switch to using specific categories for analyses so we can predetermine exactly what advice that individual needs and exactly what the advice should say. And so we're not necessarily reinventing the wheel each time. So the way that we kind of manage this is that in our Google Sheets, we use a drop-down list. So instead of writing in that narrative, you're going to be choosing from a list. And to be clear, the rules of Clean Slate are pretty complex and lots of people have very complicated records. So there's always going to be some individuals that are going to need individualized or unique advice. And so we're going to still be wanting to make those personal phone calls or write the personalized emails to those individuals, but this helps us to spend a lot less time on individuals who have less complicated records. And then another bonus of this kind of categorization system is that we're able to collect some easily sorted applicant data that we can search. So for example, now we can easily see what % of all those individuals who signed up are going to be eligible for some kind of screening, or sorry, for some kind of sealing under Clean Slate. We can also easily kind of detect different patterns in that data to see if there's some things that are happening, so for fines and costs and things like that. Okay, but within the systems and within the categories, we still want to give personalized advice. So for example, we might have 2 individuals who are eligible for auto sealing, but one person might owe fees, so we need to let them know that. We might have 2 individuals who are eligible for petition sealing, but we need to give them information about how to file petitions and access legal help in different counties. So for this, we're going to use Google Sheets conditional formatting. So I'm going to give you a quick demo of what the volunteer assignment page looks like. So you are welcome if you would like to visit this page later and play around with it. I'm just using it for this. If you'll just give me a sec, I will pull up the page. All right, so this is what our CSSP analysis sheet looks like when we give an assignment to a volunteer. So over here on the left, you have basically the information that we are collecting in the Google form that we're going to use to look up that person's record and then to also get in touch with them to give them advice. So in column N is where we're going to put our court summary link. So in Pennsylvania, we actually have criminal records available online, so we're able to send that along to the individuals as well. So to the right here is where we're going to do our analysis piece. So say we look at this person's record and we determine that they're eligible for automatic sealing. So we're going to, this is the drop down that I was referring to, where we're going to put them into a category, and that's going to help us know what advice to give. So if I'm going to choose this category, what's going to happen is that the Google Sheet is going to automatically let me know what information we need to put in to make sure that we can give the best individualized advice. So for this individual, we need to know if they owe any costs or fines, but we don't need to worry about the month or year that they're going to be eligible because they're eligible now. And we also do not need to be concerned about the referral county because they do not need to file a petition. But say we looked at a record and we notice that the individual is going to need to file a petition at a later date. They're not eligible yet, but they will be later, and they're going to need to file a petition. So I can choose eligible later, expedition date, petition, and then it's going to highlight all of these columns because we need to make sure that we are letting them know not only what fees they owe, but also the month and year that they're going to be eligible and the county where they need a referral. Okay, so pull back up my. All right, great. Okay, so our next step was to automate the process. So with a lot of technological help from my colleague Nate, who, as Jamie mentioned, is going to be featured on a future webinar, we were able to use back-end coding to automatically generate emails which give personalized advice. And so just to note, we only use these automatically generated emails at CLF but we provide the templates to all of our volunteers so they can basically create the exact same email and just manually input the information. So I'm going to show you what an email would look like. We wanted to give advice to this in this instance here. So as you can see, the email is automatically going to pull in the email address into the to field. It's going to include the individual's name. It's also going to include a link to their court summary. And then it's going to tell them that they're not eligible to have their records sealed or expunged right now, but that they're going to be eligible at a later date. Now, because we filled in the column that lets us know that this individual owes costs and fines, it's going to give them a paragraph letting them know that they need to pay off those costs and fines, and also with a link for how to do that. Now, if they didn't owe any costs and fines, that paragraph would be omitted. And then it's also going to give them, based on the county where they need to file the petition, it's going to give them a referral to the legal aid organization that might be able to help them to file that petition. So I couldn't include the entire email on this page because it's too long, but it also includes a lot of other helpful information. So for example, it'll include the phone number to a hotline to seek a private lawyer in case they're not going to be eligible for legal aid. It also includes a paragraph letting the individual know what sealing is and who can and can't see the record when it's been sealed. It also gives some information about expungement for dropped charges. If the individual lives in Philadelphia, we have a paragraph about knowing your rights for working in Philadelphia, etc. So using some of this technology, we're able to not only streamline the process, we're able to complete these analyses more quickly, but also still be giving really good and tailored advice. So our next step was to develop materials. So recognizing that sometimes we have volunteers, pro bono volunteers that maybe are going to be volunteering in an issue area that's not their normal practice or their expertise, we kind of want to make our materials be as thorough as possible and always be giving more information than you think that you need. So to begin, my colleagues Jamie and Tracy filmed a real life training that they were giving on Clean Slate. And so now we're always able to use that as a training course for volunteers, and we pair that with example records, so they're able to practice actually doing the analysis of the records as they're going through the training course. So even if you were launching a pro bono project, but you didn't necessarily have any relevant trainings coming up, you could always just film yourself doing a training in your office, and then you only have to do it one time and you're able to use it again. So that's been very helpful. We also created a volunteer toolkit, which includes a step-by-step guide, and as Jamie mentioned, we'll be happy to share this with everyone, but it includes pictures and detailed instructions. It also includes helpful charts and guides. So we found that a flow chart is really helpful for completing these analyses. It includes all the template emails so they can, volunteers can input the information and send kind of similar advice emails that we're sending, and then also a referral guide so they have all the information about legal aid and lawyer hotlines for all of the different counties across Pennsylvania. Next, we needed to do outreach so that we could get recruit capable volunteers to help with our project. So we partner, as Jamie mentioned, with the Pennsylvania Bar Association on this project. So that's been a really helpful way for us to recruit lawyers who work on CSSP. We also will periodically do trainings at different law firms about record sealing and Clean Slate, and so that's always a really good time for us to pitch the CSSP project. We also partner with law schools, and Jamie mentioned our My Clean Slate PA website. It actually has a place where lawyers can go in there and indicate that they're interested in volunteering, and then we can reach out to them and get them set up. And then we have what we refer to as the Dechert model, which we're really lucky to have Ken here with us today so he can talk more about how this works, but we found this to be our most effective way of creating kind of volunteers. So that's basically when we kind of develop a core group within a firm that becomes experts in Clean Slate and doing these screenings, and then the firm then is able to kind of take ownership of the project. And so Dechert has been our most successful example of this, but we are also working on cultivating this at other firms as well. So currently we have about 40 active volunteers. So this includes some instances where we have one volunteer at a firm or someone who's doing this on the side, or for example, where we might have like one person who is our main contact there, like at Dechert. And then lastly, we created our volunteer portal. We worked with a communications firm to develop our volunteer portal. And so basically volunteers are able to sign up to have access to this, and it has all of the materials that we need in one place. So it includes all of our training materials, all of our CSSP materials and reference materials. It also has a personalized link to the CSSP assignment, and then a kind of a form where our volunteers are able to ask us a question or to request more assignments. So lastly, just some tips for building a pro bono army. So we found, again, that developing systems was really, really helpful for us. It makes each step in the process as clear as possible, and everyone knows and understands the process and what outcomes can be expected. We focus a lot on communication with our volunteers, remembering that not everyone is always going to start out as an expert. So we want to make sure that we're providing more instructions than we think that we might need, and building up confidence and knowledge. So I use sort of a triage system. So when I get a new volunteer, I start them off, I kind of put aside some of the easier cases for screening, and I start them off on that, and then slowly build up and kind of help them have more knowledge of the different rules, and that really helps, and it definitely helps to like hook some of the volunteers. Also building up a base of super volunteers. You can tell pretty quickly which volunteers are really engaged and excited, and it's really worth your time to invest in them. And we've also, something that's been very helpful too, is we've been able to have some of these super volunteers join us at in-person clinics. This is a picture from one that we had that was really successful on MLK Day, but that's been kind of a great partnership for us to have. And then focusing on what works, for example, the Dechert model. So we're really lucky to have Ken with us today, who can tell us a little bit more about that. And then I'll turn it back over to Jamie.
So now we're going to turn it over to Ken, and Ken's going to take us through his experience at Dechert and building capacity internally to make a really successful pro bono project. And I don't know if others on this call have had experiences in the past working with firms where, you know, you felt like you had everything set up at the outset, and then you felt like you spent all your time kind of trying to monitor and figure out if the work's getting done, and you're worried that things aren't happening effectively or that the quality is not what you wanted it to be, and it can end up being a headache or feeling like more effort than it's worth. If you, like me, have had those experiences in the past, I think what's been so amazing about working with Dechert is it's been the complete opposite of that. And I think a lot of the ways that Ken built the project internally have been the reasons it's been so successful. And so I'm really excited to have Ken here today, because I think it's a perspective we at legal aid programs don't always get to hear about how the internal firm structure really works and how to build a project that's going to be really successful and effective within the firm, in order to really build capacity in a way that's going to really amplify our impact and our ability to reach people who need our legal expertise. So we're thrilled to have Ken today, and I'm going to turn it over to him to take us through the Dechert case study.
Thanks, Jamie. And, hello, everyone. I'm Ken. And as Jamie mentioned, I am from Dechert, and we're, a big international firm. We do pretty much all areas of litigation and transactional work, plus other things like trust and estates and intellectual property. And I myself, I'm an M&A lawyer. I mostly do mergers and acquisitions and public company securities filing. So critically, none of what I would otherwise be doing really overlaps very much with this. And that ended up being true with a lot of the volunteers that we had at Dechert. But, as I'll get into, we sort of found ways to kind of, sell people on this and get volunteer interest, even given that backdrop. So right now, just within Dechert, we have almost 40 volunteers as well, and this includes attorneys of all seniority levels and multiple paralegals too. Relative to the total number of individuals' cases that this overarching project has processed, I would say our contribution is somewhat small, but the thinking is that if other firms can get started doing this type of thing, so for example, I know Blank Rome is now doing it as well. In the aggregate, we can really help Jamie and Jessa and folks like that out a lot. So far, this is mostly based on our Philadelphia office, unsurprisingly, because it's a Pennsylvania law. But we do have some Pennsylvania barred attorneys in London, Washington, D.C., and I think a couple in New York too that are helping out. So it's a project that's even still now growing at Dechert, and there's a lot of interest in it. So it's really great. Like Jessa said, actually, we've got most of the volume of our work is actually done by the quote super volunteers, the folks who might have done 20 or 30 of these cases just by themselves, and who are now experienced enough at handling cases that they can do a case from start to finish. It's little oversight from us, and even less oversight needed from CLS, and that really allows the project to move along smoothly. We've been actually helping out with this since before the Clean Slate law took effect, and we started it by we first reached out to other attorneys at Dechert who were already doing sort of related work, like say pardons or expungement petitions, right? And we sort of gathered that group together and said, we could maybe form an actual formal group. At Dechert, we have Pro-Bono practice groups, essentially, which are like groups of attorneys that are, joined together by common Pro Bono sort of projects that they take on, right? And so what we did was that group of people pitched this project to the firm's Pro Bono committee. We said we'd like to start a practice group, hold a bunch of trainings, bring in people from outside to help train our attorneys, and really get this project off the ground. And by the time the Clean Slate law formally took effect, we were already off the ground and running. Next slide, Jessa, please. So what I want to talk about now really is really how we got the volunteers in Dechert, right? So I myself in our starting group, we were interested in this already. We wanted to do this kind of work, and so there was no need to really convince us that this was worth doing or worth spending our time on. But we knew we couldn't do it alone. We needed more people, and we started to think about how we could get people who might not have any background in this at all interested. And the real true societal benefits of this are obvious, right, and incredibly important, right? You can help someone who now has potential access to a new legal right that they never had before, that they have no notice of, that could dramatically improve their life. And they probably are, a lot of times they're people who couldn't have afforded to ask an attorney about it otherwise. So that's all great, but that's going to be true for almost any pro bono project that a Dechert attorney works on. So we had to think about how can we sell it even beyond that. Why this? Why focus on this? And so we really ended up settling on a lot of the more, I would say, maybe pragmatic aspects that are unique to Clean Slate. And I think I'll tell you this, this has grown faster than any of the other pro bono practice group that has started at Dechert since I've been there. So I think these pragmatic aspects are really attractive to people. And so what I mean is things like the fact that you can do these cases from start to finish from your office. You don't have to go to court, right? about half the attorneys in our Philadelphia office are transactional attorneys. They never would go before a judge. And for some of them, that might be, they might want to, that might be an interesting experience, but some of them are terrified of the prospect. And so we could sell this to them as something where you can help someone, you can get pro bono credit, and you don't ever have to go to court. You can do it from your office, right? We were able to sell it by telling people accurately that the individual cases are fairly discrete. Usually the first client's case that somebody processes takes them a long time because they're still figuring out the basics. But once you get in the habit of it, you can process an individual's case in a couple hours. And that is attractive for people who might have previously signed up to volunteer to do some work, and it spiraled out into a 100, 200-hour project that they had genuine difficulty fitting time for it into their day. This isn't necessarily like that, but it can be if you want. If you want to take on 20 or 30 of them. So there's a lot of flexibility in how much time people spend on this, and that was a selling point for us in getting our volunteers. And then for the people who did want to go to court or file petitions or things like that, we also have a related practice as part of the same group of actually filing expungement and sealing petitions. And so, we didn't lose out on potential volunteers who might have wanted to do that kind of thing, because this also gave them that opportunity. So it's a very versatile practice, and that has helped us get interested. So, I did also want to say it's worth noting that at Dechert we can count our pro bono hours towards the billable hour requirement, and we even require attorneys to do a number of pro bono hours a year. So that's not going to be true at every firm, and realistically, unfortunately, where either of those things is not the case, it will be a little bit harder to get volunteers. But we've also certainly had volunteers who have greatly exceeded their minimum requirement just on this type of work. So it's not, I wouldn't say it is essential, but it is helpful. And then Jessa, could you take us to the next slide here? Yeah, so this slide sort of covers what I'd already mentioned, but we joined together attorneys who are interested in different areas of the law, not Clean Slate itself, but other things like pardons or helping prisoners after they've come out of prison transition, but they were all kind of generally related to post-conviction relief for people who are criminal defendants, right? And by joining the interests together in that way, we were actually able to get, we had some people who came to our first training because they were interested in pardons. This is the group that handles pardons. But then they heard what we had to say about clean slate screening, and they said, oh, let me give that a try. And so we ended up having sort of overlapping volunteers, and we were able to get some additional volunteers in that way, which was really helpful. We did sort of focus in trying to get volunteers. We did focus on our more junior attorneys. We do have a lot of partners who participate in this screening project, but it is unfortunately often the case that partners will be slammed on some transaction or some big trial, and they might not have as much time to devote to this, and even more challengingly, they might not have time for, if we send out a calendar invite for a training, 3 weeks out, they might have already, that time slot might be booked for them. We can't sort of work around every single potential volunteer schedule, but our more junior attorneys are more likely to be able to have that time open. And so we sort of focused a little bit on getting volunteers from that group, and that was very successful as well. There are also some other pragmatic things that kind of affect interest, like our billable year ends in November, so that's when people's pro bono deadline must be met. We did see an uptick in volunteers in October and November. it's a little bit transparent, but we were happy to have the help. And then sort of on a more positive note, we also have found that many of our volunteers have found this work to be really fulfilling, and they like doing it, and so they actually recommend it to their own, people in their circle of friends, the people they work with that maybe I don't even know, but they'll go to them and maybe they'll ask, oh, have you hit your pro bono hour requirement? Yes, I did a lot of the clean slate work, and then ultimately they come to us, and we get a new volunteer in that way. Jessa, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So one interesting thing that we sort of didn't talk about earlier, but that is really applicable not just to Dechert, but to our whole enterprise here, is that under the Clean Slate law, automatic sealing is supposed to be finished by June of this year. It's really coming up. And when the Clean Slate law was first announced, we really didn't think the government would be necessarily able to hit that deadline, just because it's millions of records to handle in just 1 year. And especially now with the COVID-19 pandemic, we thought it would be very reasonable for them to try to extend that deadline out. But frankly, in our experience, they've actually been doing it. Very often we encounter records where it's evident from the record that there has been an auto sealing. For example, sometimes we've had people pull a record, say on Tuesday, and then they go to pull it again on the next Monday to check something, and now a bunch of the cases are already gone, right? All because they were automatically sealed. So sometimes we've sort of caught it in action like that, but more generally than that, we've noticed that these days many more clients don't have cases that come up that should be eligible for auto sealing. They're only eligible for petitions or not eligible at all, which suggests that the state's process is already very much well underway and maybe we'll hit the original deadline. So if that's the case, we sort of, we do have to ask ourselves the question of what do we do next after the auto sealing is done. And both at Dechert and at CLS, our thinking is pretty much that clients are still interested in knowing what their rights are. And maybe even somebody whose record has been auto sealed might not know that. And so if we go back to them and say, we can't find anything for you, are you sure you have something? And they remember, going to court and have paperwork evidencing their record, the fact that we can't find it usually means that the automatic sealing occurred, and that in and of itself is great news for somebody. So so I mean, and I saw that we had a question or two come in on this. It's worth noting all the records that we pull for somebody, we pull from the public record. And in fact, the Clean Slate law is removing things from the public record when something is sealed. So that's it's both a bit of a practical constraint on what we can do, because if the client's record is automatically sealed, we can't really tell them that with certainty most of the time, because for us, it just shows up as an empty record. But on the flip side of that, the fact that we're able to pull the records purely from the public record means we don't have to rely on clients having, saved their paperwork and having access to a scanner and have, whether or not they remembered everything, right? We pull from the public record, and so there's kind of a neutral, easily accessible starting point, which helps. I guess the last thing I really wanted to say before we go to questions is, obviously we're doing this webinar right now rather than an in-person conference because of the coronavirus pandemic. And while that has impacted maybe almost every aspect of attorneys' lives right now, for purposes of the Clean Slate Project at Dechert, it's, if anything, it's increased interest, because a lot of types of work, pro bono and otherwise, can't be done right now. The courts are closed, right? The petitions filing system is shut down, right? Can't call somebody to, the courthouse isn't open to call them to ask them questions, right? But we can still do screenings unhindered. So that in and of itself has made it. We've seen an increase in interest lately because other types of work are sort of foreclosed to people, and this is not. And so we're trying to, sort of have this as a little bit of a silver lining and use this time the best we can to process more cases. So that's pretty much all I got.
Great. So this is Katie from CLS. I'm just going to jump in right away and start asking some questions to the panel that have been coming in. First, I just want to go ahead and transition from what Ken just said and ask the whole panel, what have you seen since COVID-19 has, led to stay-at-home orders? What kind of changes have you seen? Have you seen a decrease in interest, an increase in interest, any other changes with this Clean Slate Screening Project?
This is Jessa.
This is Jamie. Oh, go ahead, Jessa.
I was just going to start by saying as the person who fields the requests from the volunteers, similarly to what Ken mentioned, we have found that this is a bit of a silver lining because it is work that can be done remotely, and some lawyers who maybe are having a decrease in their casework are absolutely more interested in this. So we've gotten a huge increase in the number of volunteers, and I'll let Jamie add to that.
Thanks, Jessa. I was just going to add that in the week after we moved to, I think Jessa and I were both inundated with emails from pro bono firms and folks that we had trained like a year ago who were coming back to the table to say, give us more cases now. So we definitely saw that uptick. What I also wanted to note for those who weren't with us on the session last week is that one of the amazing parts about Clean Slate is the automated nature of it has meant that for almost all of the counties in Pennsylvania, cases have continued to be sealed during the crisis because so much of that process happens without the need to really push any paperwork at all. It's all an automatic process. So the county courts have still had to sign off electronically to make that happen, but almost all of the counties have been doing that. So while the rest of the system has kind of come to a halt, Clean Slate has moved forward and is largely, as Ken was saying, on target to be completed with the backlog by June. Although of course there'll still be cases becoming newly eligible going forward, so there'll be cases continuing to be clean slated into the future. But the backlog is very much on track to be completed around June, at the end of June, and so it's been really encouraging to see that process kind of continue and benefit folks when everything else has kind of been at a halt. So it's been kind of a nice merging of the fact that Clean Slate is still going forward, and so there's still advice and information we can give to people, and all these pro bono firm folks being really eager to engage in this kind of remote work. So it's really made this project feel like it is kind of like really, really well suited to the crazy time that we're currently in.
Great. So I'm just going to go through a lot of these audience questions. We are going to try to get to everything. If anybody else has any other questions, feel free to write them into the question box. I can see that 2 people have their hands raised. I don't know if that's on purpose, but if it is, please go ahead and ask the question that you have in the question box. So a lot of questions we have are about nuts and bolts of how this Clean Slate Screening Project works. So can you talk a little bit about accessing records? Ken's already mentioned that records are public online, but we have questions about, do we get the records? Do they have to provide the records to you?
So this is Jamie. So in Pennsylvania, we do have online access to records, which we know is not the case in every state. And of course, Clean Slate, as Ken alluded to, has somewhat changed that because if something's already been sealed, unless you have a special secure access, you can't see that the record's been sealed. It comes up as just no record found. So the way we've kind of built that into the project is that one of the categories that Jessa was showing you that trigger the follow-up emails that are template forms is no record found. So if we go onto the public court database and we can't find somebody's record, there are other reasons that might be. It doesn't necessarily mean their record has been clean slated. It could be that it was a state police only record that was never brought to court. It could be that it's a juvenile record. It could be that they had a record in a different state or a federal record. So we don't just automatically assume, oh, there's no record found, you definitely had your record sealed. But our template email kind of walks people through those possibilities. There are a few different reasons we might not have been able to find your record. One of them might be because your record's been sealed. Here's what that means. And then we also give people information about how they can get their full state police history, which in Pennsylvania is called an access and review. There's a form people can send away for to get their complete record of any time they were ever fingerprinted, juvenile, adult, sealed, not sealed. Unless it's been fully expunged, it'll show up on that access and review. So one thing we do is advise people in cases where we can't find any record for them, you know, this is the situation, here's the next step you can take to try to procure your own record. And if you do that and there's information on it that you need help with, here are the different legal aid programs you can connect to get follow-up assistance. So that's just another example of how these kind of different categories and templates link up to be able to address these different situations where we may not have access. I imagine if you're in a state that has no online access to records, it would be a little bit more challenging to structure a project like this, because you would have to rely on people first going to get their records or already having their records. So I do see the additional hurdle that would cause for people, but you know, if there is any sort of online access, it really does make a project like this work a lot better, although I'm sure there are ways to still be able to kind of build something similar where people do have to go and get those records. And I know on past conversations we've had in this National Record Clearing Project, and a topic that will come up again next week on our barriers to record clearing panel, is creative ways to try to get access to records, like partnering with different agencies like public defenders' offices or district attorneys' offices, or kind of finding creative ways to partner with agencies that might be able to help with access to record issues. So stay tuned next week to hear a little bit more about that topic.
Okay, and we also have questions about security and confidentiality of the information that the individuals provide. Questions like, do you feel like this is a secure way of providing confidential information, sensitive information such as social security numbers? Is that something that someone provides to you and you keep in a Google form? Do you find that the Google Forms are secure enough? And do you have these individuals sign a release so that you can provide the information to the pro bono attorneys, or how does that work?
So we don't collect social security numbers through the Clean Slate Screening Project. We don't really have a need to do that. And obviously for security reasons, if we don't have a strong need to do it, we don't want to do that. If cases eventually become, for example, CLS intake cases, if we refer somebody to our office and they come in through intake, at that point, we do need social security numbers, but that's a totally different process outside of the Clean Slate Screening Project. So the Google form does not have any information that's at that level of sensitivity. And from our understanding, talking with our tech folks, you know, Google Forms are about as secure as a lot of different other tools, and they're kind of pros and cons to various approaches, but it's the most sort of user-friendly and approachable form we've found to be able to use, and it feeds so easily into this kind of spreadsheet and Gmail-based system that we've built that it's really been much easier to operationalize it through that. And so we have decided that that's, you know, the way that we've proceeded with it. And since we're not collecting things like socials, we've been comfortable with that. In terms of the emails themselves and the information that goes into it, for the most part, all the information we're giving people is a matter of public record because it's being pulled from public court dockets. So while it's certainly sensitive in the sense that we wouldn't want to broadcast it to the world, you know, it's not information that's subject to any kind of confidentiality or other types of protections that we would be concerned about. So we do communicate that via email. And then the last part of the question about processes to refer to firms, we do say on the front end that when people sign up for the project, that the Clean Slate Screening Project, which consists of CLS and our volunteers, maybe getting back to them. And so it's kind of put out at the forefront. So we don't have any release to refer cases. It's just kind of framed that way from the beginning. That it's not a CLS project, it's the Clean Slate Screening Project, which is a project of CLS, the Pennsylvania Bar Association, and all of our volunteer and pro bono partners. But I'm actually curious, maybe Ken can speak to this a little bit more. When we were working with firms to kind of figure out the referral process, we got a lot of questions about things like conflicts checks and what kinds of sort of protocols are required to retain clients if it's just a brief service, kind of brief advice type case. How do you make that scope of representation really clear to people? So Ken, would you mind just speaking a little bit to how you've kind of tackled those types of questions at Dechert?
Yeah, sure. In fact, the largest amount of initial internal pushback we got to working on this was from essentially our conflicts department. They said, this is going to involve huge numbers of individual clients, and normally we would set up a separate matter for each. We were sort of able to get them comfortable by reference to some stuff we'd done in the M&A context with auction deals, in treating this as one matter, the Clean Slate Screening Project. But we do run an individualized conflict check for every single client that we take, and before we confirm with CLS that we accept a client, essentially, we make sure that we don't have any conflicts with them, which usually takes a couple days. So I try to ask for new groups of clients a little bit in advance of when I think we'll need them. All of our emails are saved on our document managed system, including the emails we send to clients here. But that is fortunately protected by like many different layers of security. They're increasing the security of it on us all the time. But like Jamie said, we don't, obviously we wouldn't want our emails to sort of just go out to the public, but because the results of the analysis are entirely based on an application of a public law to public record, we don't think that we're pretty comfortable in the systems we use are sufficient to protect the level of confidentiality needed here. And in terms of completing representations with individual clients, we are careful to include at the bottom of our sort of ultimate definitive email to each client a statement saying that this terminates, our representation ends here, right? This is where our free assistance to you stops. We've given you this advice, but you might need to the extent you need to seek attorney help going forward, that would have to be a separate process. And when we do have clients who want us to file petitions and where we have filed them, then we set up a separate matter number. We rerun them through conflicts. We have them sign an engagement letter, the usual stuff like that.
Okay, we have kind of a related question. When you find that the individual you're analyzing does actually require a petition, is that something that you do? And this could be for the entire panel, or is it something that they have to file pro se, or what do you do in that situation?
So I can speak to this again. So our practice at Dechert has been, if the client is eligible to file a petition, and we advise them of that, and they want to file one, if they're in Philadelphia County, which is where our office is located, where the courthouses are located, we are willing to do that for them if they're interested. And then, like I said, we put it through the usual process of opening a matter. In counties outside of Philadelphia, it would be very. We've recently been figuring out ways to sort of make the filings fully electronically. And I know that CLS has some kind of special designation as a pro bono organization so that they don't need to seek informal papyrus relief to waive the filing fees for individual clients. But we at Dechert do. So for each case we take on to file the petition, we need to either get a fee waiver or pay the fee. And so that puts in an extra few layers of going to court and sometimes presenting before a judge. And we didn't think it would be sort of practical for us to do that in counties that may be a plane trip away from our office. And so for clients that are not based in Philadelphia, we have a list of referral agencies in their county of residence that do this kind of work pro bono. We sort of provide that information to them, hours at which they can contact, phone number, the website, stuff like that.
And I'll just add for the project as a whole, for folks who aren't lucky enough to get sent over to Dechert, one of the things that Jessa showed you in terms of how the automated emails get inputted include counties for referral. And right at the very beginning of starting this CSSP project, I put together a guide to all the different legal aid programs in Pennsylvania with the help of many wonderful colleagues, some of whom are on the call, so thank you again for that. But it basically details for our volunteers which legal aid programs cover which counties, because you need to file the petition in the county where the case was, which isn't necessarily where people live. And so we put together each program in Pennsylvania's counties and rules and sort of intake procedures in terms of what types of cases they'll take, what % of poverty you need to be at, if there are any special sort of criteria they use to decide which cases they'll take. And we put that into a comprehensive volunteer guide. So that's part of the toolkit. But then also when we input on the spreadsheet that somebody needs a referral to X county, say Monroe County in Pennsylvania, that automatically inputs then the information for that legal aid program, as well as the information for as Jessa was explaining, the county bar association that's in that region, so that if they're not income eligible or have some other reason they're not eligible for legal aid, they still have a referral source where they can call a pro bono number and try to get assistance. So we have tried to kind of tackle that from a systemic level in terms of connecting people up with the legal assistance they need in the specific county where their case is.
Another question is about missing data. What do you do if there is missing data in the record that you're reviewing, especially if it affects your ability to tell someone whether they're eligible or not?
Jessa, do you want to take that one on?
Sure. So I mentioned that one of the first steps that we took was to kind of create these different categories. And the categories that we've had have kind of evolved over time. And we continue to, as we are going through these and finding different instances where it might make sense to have a category, we continue to kind of add to them. And that's kind of a perfect example. We were finding that we were coming across a lot of different records, especially older records where there was important information missing. Sometimes we're able to still make a determination if we have a good idea about what the grading information might be like, et cetera, for that type of crime. But in some cases, we're not able to completely analyze that record. So we created a specific category for that. So it basically lets the individual know that it's possible that their record might be eligible for sealing, but it's missing information, so we can't tell. So we basically will then refer them to the appropriate legal aid or lawyer hotline to get legal help to get try to get that missing information put in. Realizing that in some instances that might not be possible, we kind of we let them know they might be able to go to the courthouse and try to get it put in for themselves. But generally we try to refer them to legal aid. So that's an example of a category that we found a need for that we added later on.
Another question, we got two questions that relate to how Clean Slate works and how sealing works in Pennsylvania, meaning who is this record viewable by, how can this record be used? And I think the import of the questions is, do you provide that information to the individual? What if the individual might want to get their record expunged or fully erased if they might be eligible? Do you provide information about that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. In Pennsylvania, our sealing law means that the general public can't view the record. The vast majority of employers, landlords, schools, et cetera, wouldn't be able to review the record. Currently, the only way a sealed record would come up on a background check would be through an FBI background check, which is a problem we've been working very hard to solve for a long time and are hopeful we will be able to resolve. The FBI has recently, as Katie presented on a past webinar, taken great steps to start sealing records from the states where they hadn't been doing that before. And so we're very hopeful that, especially once all the current craziness with the pandemic dies down, we'll be able to get the FBI to go back and seal from its records all of the cases that have been clean slated here in PA, which will obviously take some time, but we're hopeful we'll address that problem moving forward. But in the meanwhile, it's a very real reality for people who need FBI clearances for jobs that their sealed record will still show up. And so that is part of the advice that we give people. We have a flyer also that we do give to people in order to explain sort of who can see a sealed record and who can't and what the implications are. The other major implication of sealed records is that law enforcement and courts can still see them, and there are a couple of other narrow exceptions about when it can be viewed. But for our purposes, we're mostly focused on how is this going to affect background checks, and so we do give people that information about the FBI issue. And then in terms of if they are eligible for expungement in Pennsylvania, that would generally only be non-conviction cases. So if they have a conviction, for the most part, they're going to only be eligible for sealing. But for non-convictions that have been auto-sealed, the individual may also be able to get an expungement of that information. And so one of our template email, or all of our template emails that talk about sealing, if the person also can get something expunged, we have a paragraph in the template email that talks about you can also get these charges expunged, and gives information about how folks can go about doing that as well. And we can even sometimes go in and highlight specific information in the template email if it's particularly relevant to somebody's situation. So we do try to be as comprehensive as possible in terms of advising people about all of these different aspects of their case. And then also, of course, providing them with the information about, next steps and how they can move forward in these various ways.
Okay, can you guys talk a little bit more about, you mentioned using this group of people as kind of a source of stories and sending them emails. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of emails that you send, the experiences you've had getting feedback and stories, what you've used the stories for?
This is Jessa. I can answer this one. So we send a number of different types of emails to the list. So some of them are is kind of helpful tips or information. For some examples include we've sent information about knowing your rights when looking for work in Pennsylvania. We'll send information reminding people to check to see if their record has been sealed and giving them information about how to do that. We actually sent out a survey over the email list asking for the different kind of information that would be most helpful for the people on that list, and they responded. So we kind of try to give them information that will be helpful. But then, as Jamie was mentioning, we also send information to the list about different advocacy efforts, and often ask people on that list if they might be willing to share their stories. So the way that we do that is we send them basically a Google form asking them some specific questions, and then we let them know that we will not share their story without talking to them first, but then we will, if we have a specific need, or we might want to be putting together a fact sheet or of client stories or things of that nature, then we'll get back in touch with them and ask them if they would be willing to share their stories. And I think this has been just a really great experience in general. I, as someone who's often making the follow-up calls to the people who are sharing their stories, I have been just kind of overwhelmed by the number of people who really want to share their stories to try to kind of help make the situation better for other people. I think in general, having the Google form makes a lot of the individuals on this list who don't always feel like they're being heard and are often struggling with issues related to having a criminal record. It's just, in general, it's been, I think, a really positive experience.
And I'll just add that part of the reason we started doing these email blasts to folks is that we realized early on that it was going to take us a really long time to get through the 8,000 or so people who had signed up for help. And we didn't want folks to think we had forgotten about them or were leaving them hanging in the meanwhile. And so we kind of built this email-based system so that we could get people a lot of the information they needed to try to kind of figure it out for themselves to the extent they could while they were waiting to hear back from a lawyer. And so early on, we also had the help of our communications program to put together animated explainer videos and various other types of guides for individuals to be able to try to navigate for themselves the process of going to the website and figuring out what's showing up on their record, and then doing some analysis to figure out if they are going to be eligible for Clean Slate. So a lot of those sort of communication-based tools were things we communicated to folks on the list early on, so that people can, try to figure out for themselves if there are steps they need to take, like paying court fines and costs and things of that nature. So early on, we definitely were utilizing the list in that way to try to get people the information they needed while they were waiting for their individualized information and advice. And as time has progressed and we've gotten much closer to tackling that backlog, and also much closer to the courts having tackled the backlog of Clean Slate cases in general, we've been kind of focusing more on these know your rights and also advocacy type blasts that have kind of helped us think about the future of all of this. We're really hopeful we're going to try to get rid of the fines and costs requirement. We really want to expand Clean Slate to felony convictions. There's so much more work to be done where we can continue to kind of all work together to figure out what that future looks like, and keep people in touch with each other and keep people in touch with advocacy efforts happening. It's just really helpful.
Okay, one final question for Ken. When it comes to pro bono attorneys, you mentioned that this is the attorneys who are working on this stuff are oftentimes not, obviously this isn't their normal expertise or practice area. What challenges have you seen there? Have people been excited about taking on new kinds of things, or has that been a challenge?
It has been a challenge for sure. The good news is that in a way, this was equally far afield from people's day-to-day work for almost every one of our volunteers, because very little of what we do day-to-day is close to this, which means that we could apply almost the same level of training to anyone, no matter what their practice group was, to get them sort of up to speed. And basically the way we've managed it is with very robust trainings that are often individualized, like a one-on-one meeting or call to walk through how this is done, to answer questions. And then especially early on, I would say a lot of hand-holding, essentially. We review the results of every volunteer's first few analyses. We review their email before it goes to the client. We participate in any calls that they have with the client, right? And so we just sort of make sure that they're on the right track. Our leadership team is very available for questions. And so several of our volunteers will ask us maybe 10 to 15 questions before they're done their first case. And so basically with heavy oversight, we've been able to get everyone up to speed on what they need to do. But the really, I would say, cool thing from my perspective as the co-chair of the group is then, we have some of our volunteers who become so experienced that they aren't asking any questions, and their analyses are always correct, and we can just sort of let them go off and take cases as they see fit without a lot of oversight. They sort of become experts in this over time.
Well, I hear from Katie that we've reached the end of our audience questions. So I just want to thank my other panelists and Katie, as well as everyone who joined us today for being part of this conversation. We hope it was useful to you in your practices. And I also just wanted to extend, you see our email addresses up here. After last week's session, some folks had reached out with more detailed or in-depth questions specific to their state or their practice. And I just want to, express that that's very welcome. So if there's something that you wanted to ask, but thought it was, too specific to your situation, or if follow-up questions occur to you, do feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to set off set up one-off calls with folks to kind of dig into some of the stuff in more detail. And as we've already said, we're also going to follow up this presentation by sending around both the PowerPoint as well as all the materials as samples that Jessa referenced. So hopefully being able to kind of see what those things look like will help answer any lingering questions that folks have. But like I said, do feel free to reach out, definitely. And if you're not already on our National Record Clearing Project listserv, you can also email Jessa if you want to get on that listserv. And just in closing, just a reminder that we'll be here the following 3 Wednesdays with more exciting topics to bring to you. So we hope to see you back here again. So have a great afternoon, everyone.